At 11:47 on a cold morning outside a Manhattan courthouse, Evelyn Hart stood 7 months pregnant and completely alone. Daniel smirked as reporters laughed behind him. "Take the money, Evelyn." "You have nothing left." Her face went pale, but her eyes stayed steady. "Laugh while you can, Daniel." Then the roar of engines filled the sky. A billionaire's private jet descended nearby, and Malcolm Reed stepped forward. "Chairwoman Hart," he said, "your board is waiting." Why had everyone mistaken this pregnant wife for powerless? Watch until the end, and subscribe to uncover the truth. Laugh while you can, Daniel, because the papers you used to destroy me are about to destroy everyone who signed them. Evelyn Hart's voice carried across the courthouse steps. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Daniel Mercer stopped beside the black SUV waiting at the curb. His attorney paused behind him. Vanessa Hartwell lowered her sunglasses just enough to look over the frames. The reporters moved closer. Evelyn stood alone near the heavy stone columns of the Manhattan courthouse, one hand resting beneath her pregnant belly. Her ivory dress was simple and loose around her 7-month pregnancy. She wore flat shoes because her doctor had warned her about swelling. A cream coat hung over one arm. No assistant waited beside her. No lawyer stayed to shield her from the cameras. No family member stood nearby. Daniel glanced at the divorce papers in his hand, then looked back at her. "You signed them," he said. "It's over." Evelyn watched him carefully. His charcoal suit fit him perfectly. His dark hair was combed back. His silver watch flashed beneath his cuff when he lifted the settlement agreement. He looked polished, successful, untouchable. 3 years earlier, he had stood inside a tiny Brooklyn apartment and promised her he would never become a man who measured people by what they owned. Now he was holding their divorce like a trophy. "Yes," Evelyn said, "I signed them." Daniel's jaw shifted. "Then stop threatening people." "I didn't threaten you." Vanessa let out a soft laugh. The sound was meant for the reporters. It worked. Several cameras turned toward her. She stepped closer to Daniel, dressed in a fitted red coat and black heels that struck the pavement with sharp, confident clicks.
"Evelyn," Vanessa said, "you just left court with nothing."
"This isn't the moment to pretend you still have leverage." Evelyn looked at her half-sister. Vanessa did not know Evelyn was aware of the reporters she had called. She did not know Evelyn had seen the text message that morning. Front steps. 11:30. Get her reaction when she realizes Daniel chose us. Vanessa had sent it to a public relations consultant. She had copied Daniel. He had never replied. That silence had told Evelyn enough. A reporter raised his phone. "Mrs. Mercer, is it true you refused a $2 million settlement?" Evelyn turned toward him.
My name is Evelyn Hart.
"You're still legally Mrs. Mercer until the judgment is entered," another reporter said. "Then you can call me Evelyn." Daniel exhaled through his nose. "You always do this," he said. "You turn every simple conversation into some kind of test." Her attention returned to him. "A test? You want people to prove themselves without telling them the rules." "You knew the rules, Daniel." "No, Evelyn. I knew you wanted to be rescued every time you created disaster." The words landed harder than she expected. Her fingers pressed against the fabric covering her stomach. The baby moved. A quick turn. A small push. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a second and breathed through it. Daniel saw the movement. His expression changed, but only briefly. Concern appeared, then vanished behind frustration. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine. Did you eat?" Vanessa's smile tightened. Evelyn noticed. So did Daniel. That tiny moment of concern had annoyed Vanessa, and she had failed to hide it. "I said I'm fine," Evelyn repeated. Daniel took a step toward her. "You shouldn't be standing out here. And where should I stand?" "You know what I mean." "No. Tell me." He looked at the reporters surrounding them. Vanessa touched his arm. "Daniel, the car is waiting." Evelyn's gaze dropped to Vanessa's hand. Daniel did not remove it. Something inside Evelyn went quiet. She had spent months trying to understand when her marriage had changed. She had searched through conversations, missed calls, late meetings, and canceled dinners. She had wondered whether she had been too distant, too private, too slow to trust him with the truth about her family. But the answer was simpler. Daniel liked being admired. Vanessa admired him whenever it helped Vanessa. Evelyn had loved him enough to tell him when he was wrong. A marriage could survive financial pressure. It could survive fear and disappointment. It could even survive anger, if both people still respected the truth. It could not survive when one person preferred a useful lie. Daniel held out a white envelope. "This is the cashier's check." Evelyn did not take it. "The judge already approved the agreement," she said. "This isn't part of the agreement. Then what is it?" $200,000. One of the reporters gave a low whistle. Vanessa glanced toward the cameras, pleased. Daniel continued. "It should cover rent, medical expenses, and whatever you need until the baby is born." Evelyn stared at the envelope. For 6 weeks, Daniel's legal team had demanded access to every account in her name. They had found the small checking account she used for groceries. They had found the Brooklyn apartment her mother left her. They had found no investments, no trust distributions, and no luxury properties. That was exactly what Evelyn had intended them to find. The Hartwell Trust did not distribute money to her personal accounts. It held voting rights, not spending money. Her father had designed it to keep the company away from anyone who married into the family for wealth. Daniel's attorney had called her financially insignificant. Vanessa had supplied documents claiming Evelyn had signed away any remaining interest in Hartwell Aviation years ago. Daniel had believed them. Now he was offering her $200,000 in front of cameras. Not enough to protect her future, just enough to make him look generous. Evelyn looked at him. Did Vanessa suggest this? Vanessa answered before Daniel could. He came up with it himself, I asked Daniel, and he doesn't owe you another explanation. Daniel pulled his arm away from Vanessa. Stop, he said. Vanessa blinked. I'm trying to help. I said stop. For a moment, Evelyn saw the man she had married. Then Daniel looked at the envelope again. Take it, he said. Whatever happened between us, the baby shouldn't suffer. Evelyn's voice dropped. Our baby. Daniel's face hardened. You refuse to confirm that. I refuse to hand my medical records to your corporate attorneys. They were trying to establish facts. My doctor confirmed the pregnancy timeline. That isn't the same as a paternity test. The reporters became silent. Vanessa kept her expression calm, but satisfaction showed in her eyes. She had wanted this said in public. Evelyn stepped forward. Daniel held his ground, though his hand tightened around the envelope. You asked me for a prenatal paternity test after your attorney warned you that pregnancy could affect the divorce settlement, Evelyn said. You didn't ask because you believed I betrayed you. You asked because you wanted a stronger legal position. That's not fair. It's accurate. You wouldn't answer basic questions. You stopped speaking to me as your wife. You questioned me like I was an employee who had stolen from you. Daniel's voice rose. Because you lied about your family. I kept parts of my family private. You told me your father was dead. He is. You said he left you nothing. I said I never wanted his money. That is not the same thing. No, Evelyn said. It isn't. Daniel studied her. The noise from the street seemed to fade behind his stare. What does that mean? Vanessa moved between them slightly. It means she's doing what she always does. She drops half a sentence, then waits for everyone to chase her. Evelyn looked past Vanessa. Do you remember the night we moved into our first apartment? She asked Daniel. His eyebrows pulled together. What? The sink leaked. The heat didn't work. We had one chair. Evelyn, this is not the time. You said if you ever became successful, you would never let money decide who deserved respect. Daniel glanced toward the reporters. She continued before he could interrupt. You said humiliation was a weapon used by frightened people. You said a strong man didn't need an audience to prove he was strong. His face reddened. That was before I learned you had built our entire marriage around secrets. No, that was before people started applauding every bad decision you made. Daniel stepped closer. Take the check. No, Evelyn, I don't want it. His voice dropped. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She almost laughed. He had used that sentence during mediation. He had used it when asking her to leave their apartment. He had used it before sending his assistant to collect her key. Each time what he meant was simple. Do not make me feel guilty for what I have chosen. Evelyn folded her coat over her arm. You made your choice, she said. Keep your money. Vanessa gave another small laugh. Pride is expensive. Evelyn turned toward her. So is fraud. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Daniel noticed. What fraud? He asked. Evelyn held Vanessa's gaze. For months, Vanessa had treated her like a woman who had forgotten how powerful the Hartwell name could be. She had assumed Evelyn's silence came from weakness. It came from patience. Evelyn had learned from her father that people became careless when they believed they had already won. Vanessa had become very careless. You'll find out, Evelyn said. Daniel shook his head. There it is again. Another warning. Another secret. You could have saved our marriage by telling the truth. Evelyn's eyes stung, but she would not cry in front of Vanessa's cameras. You could have saved it by asking me privately before accusing me publicly. I asked you for months. You demanded bank statements. You hired investigators. You searched my mother's apartment. You never sat across from me and said, Evelyn, I'm afraid, and I need you to help me understand. Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out, Evelyn continued. You wanted evidence because evidence could be used in court. You didn't want an honest answer because an honest answer might have required you to trust me. His face changed. Pain appeared there. Real pain. It would have moved her once. Today, she could not afford to carry his pain along with her own. A camera shutter clicked. Vanessa stepped closer to Daniel and lowered her voice, though not enough to keep the nearest reporter from hearing. She's manipulating you. Evelyn glanced at her. Vanessa lifted her chin. You always hated that father trusted me, Evelyn said. Vanessa's eyes sharpened. He didn't trust you. He felt guilty about abandoning you and your mother. Daniel looked between them. You said you barely knew each other. That's what Vanessa wanted you to believe. Vanessa scoffed. Our father gave you a few sentimental gifts because he felt sorry for you. That doesn't make you part of his company. Evelyn looked at the ring on her right hand. It was an old piece of brushed gold, plain except for a small wing carved into its surface. Daniel had asked about it when they first met. She had told him it belonged to her father. He had never asked again. Now Vanessa's attention dropped to the ring. For the first time that morning, uncertainty crossed her face. It lasted less than a second. Daniel followed her gaze. "What is that symbol?" he asked. Vanessa answered quickly. "An old family design." Evelyn said nothing. A black sedan pulled away from the curb behind them. A bus groaned through the intersection, somewhere near the courthouse entrance. A street vendor shouted about coffee and bottled water. The ordinary sounds made the moment feel stranger. Daniel slipped the envelope inside his coat. "Fine," he said. "If you don't want help, I won't force you." Evelyn nodded. He hesitated. "Where are you going? Why? You're pregnant. You remembered." His expression tightened. "I never forgot. You questioned whether the child was yours. That was my attorney's advice. You followed it. I was angry, and I was your wife." The words stopped him again. A reporter called out, "Mr. Mercer, are you planning to request full custody after the birth?" Evelyn turned sharply. Daniel looked at the reporter. No comment. Vanessa touched his sleeve. "The petition hasn't been finalized." Daniel pulled away. "What petition?" he asked. Vanessa froze. Evelyn watched both of them. Daniel lowered his voice. "What petition, Vanessa?" She recovered quickly. "Your family attorney prepared options. That's all. You said it hadn't been finalized. It hasn't. I never authorized a custody petition. You authorized us to protect you." "From my child?" "From Evelyn." The cameras were still recording. Daniel looked around, finally understanding how much of the conversation was public. Vanessa's mistake was small but important. She had spoken too freely because she believed Evelyn was already defeated. Evelyn placed both hands over her belly. The baby moved again. This time, Daniel noticed the tension in her face. "Are you in pain?" he asked. "Pressure. It will pass. I can take you to your doctor." "No, at least let me call someone." "There is someone coming." Vanessa laughed. "Who? Your neighbor from Brooklyn?" A few reporters smiled. One man near the back whispered something to his cameraman. The cameraman chuckled. Evelyn looked toward the street. No car had arrived yet. She checked the time on her phone. 11:47. Malcolm's message had come 30 minutes earlier. "Stay where the public can see you. Do not enter any vehicles sent by Daniel or Vanessa. We found a second transfer document. I'm coming personally." Evelyn had replied with one word: understood. She had not expected him to come himself. Malcolm Reed did not interrupt his schedule for anyone. He ran Reed Capital, held major investments in aerospace and logistics, and had served beside her father on the Hartwell Aviation Board for nearly 20 years. After her father died, Malcolm had called Evelyn every month. She rarely answered. He had warned her that Vanessa was consolidating influence. Evelyn had told him she wanted no part of the Hartwell empire. She had believed walking away would keep her marriage clean. Instead, her absence had given Vanessa space to rewrite the truth. A low vibration passed through the air. At first, no one reacted. Manhattan was always full of engines, construction, sirens, and distant aircraft. Then the sound deepened. Several reporters looked up. Daniel turned toward the river. A dark helicopter crossed between the buildings, moving south. Behind the courthouse, beyond the line of rooftops, another aircraft descended toward the private aviation terminal across the water. Vanessa checked her phone. Her face lost color. Evelyn saw it. "What is it?" Daniel asked. "Nothing. That isn't nothing." Vanessa locked the screen. "Hartwell's flight operations sent an alert." "About what?" "A company aircraft changed its landing schedule." Daniel frowned. "Why would you get an alert about that?" "Because I'm acting chair." Evelyn met Vanessa's eyes. "For now," she said. The reporter sensed the shift. Questions came from every direction. "Mrs. Mercer, are you connected to Hartwell Aviation? Is that company jet here for you?" "Vanessa, is there a leadership dispute?" "Daniel, did you know your wife was a Hartwell?" Daniel looked at Evelyn as though the ground beneath him had moved. "You told me Hart was your mother's name." "It was. And Hartwell?" "My father's." His lips parted. "No," he said quietly. Vanessa moved beside him. "Do not let her confuse you. She has no operational position, no shares that matter, no authority." The vibration faded, but the tension remained. Two black SUVs turned onto the street. They moved slowly throughout traffic, followed by a third vehicle. The first SUV stopped beside the courthouse. The driver stepped out. Then another door opened. A tall man in a dark suit emerged, followed by two security officers. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair and a calm expression that made the crowd quiet faster than shouting could have. Malcolm Reed crossed the sidewalk. Reporters recognized him almost immediately. "Mr. Reed! Malcolm, why are you here?" "Is Reed Capital buying Hartwell Aviation? Did you come for Vanessa?" Malcolm ignored every question. He walked directly to Evelyn. Daniel stepped into his path. "Can I help you?" Malcolm stopped. His eyes moved over Daniel's face with no sign of recognition. "I'm here for Evelyn." Daniel glanced at the security officers, then back at Malcolm. "I'm her husband." "Former husband," Evelyn said. Daniel flinched. Malcolm looked at the courthouse doors. "Was the agreement entered?" "She signed it," Vanessa said. "The marriage is finished." Malcolm turned toward her. "Vanessa, Her confidence returned, though it looked forced. Malcolm, you could have called. I did. I've been occupied. You have been avoiding the board's legal counsel since 7 this morning. That is a company matter. Yes, Malcolm said, it is. Daniel looked at Evelyn. How do you know him? Evelyn opened her mouth, but Malcolm answered first. I was her father's closest business partner. Daniel's eyes moved back to Evelyn. You said your father left you nothing. Evelyn held his stare. He left me responsibilities I did not want. Vanessa stepped forward. This performance changes nothing. Evelyn signed away any interest she had. Malcolm's expression remained calm. Did she? I have the documents. I have copies too. Vanessa's confidence slipped again. Malcolm reached inside his coat and removed a folded paper. You may want to examine the signature page before you repeat that claim in front of cameras. Vanessa did not take it. Daniel looked at her. What is he talking about? Legal intimidation. Malcolm gave a faint nod. That is one interpretation. Evelyn felt a sharp pressure low in her abdomen. She inhaled slowly. Malcolm noticed. We need to leave, he said. I'm all right. You have been standing for too long. Daniel moved closer. I can take her. Malcolm looked at him. No, the word was quiet, final. Daniel's face hardened. You don't get to decide that, neither do you anymore. For a moment, Evelyn thought Daniel might argue. Then he looked at her stomach. His anger faded into something more complicated. Evelyn, he said, where are you going? She looked at him for a long second. There were 1,000 answers she could have given. To reclaim what was stolen, to protect her child, to learn how deeply Vanessa's fraud had spread, to face the family she had spent years avoiding. Instead, she said, Dallas. Vanessa's head snapped toward her. Why? Malcolm answered. An emergency Hartwell Aviation board meeting has been called for tonight. You can't call a meeting without the acting chair. I didn't call it. The street became silent. Vanessa stared at Evelyn. Malcolm held out his hand, not to lead her, but to offer support if she chose to take it. Evelyn looked at that hand. For years, she had refused help because she feared dependence. She had confused isolation with strength. Her mother had done the same until pride became a locked door no one could open. Strength was not refusing every hand. Strength was knowing which hand came with a price and which one came with respect. Evelyn placed her fingers lightly against Malcolm's palm. He steadied her as she stepped toward the SUV. Daniel moved in front of the door. Wait, Malcolm's security officer shifted, but Evelyn lifted one hand. It's fine. Daniel looked at her. His face no longer carried the cold certainty he had worn outside the courtroom. Confusion had broken through it, so had fear. Who are you? He asked. Evelyn felt the question more deeply than she wanted to admit. He had slept beside her for 3 years. He had heard her laugh in the dark. He had held her after her mother died. He had once known how she took her coffee and which side of the bed she preferred. Yet now he was asking who she was. She answered carefully. The same woman you married. No. Yes, Daniel. You never told me any of this. You never told me Vanessa was preparing to take my baby. I didn't know. You didn't want to know what she was doing as long as she made you feel powerful. His face tightened. That isn't fair, it will be. He stared at her. What does that mean? It means fairness comes after the truth. Vanessa stepped beside him. She's bluffing. Malcolm is using her to interfere with the acquisition. Malcolm opened the rear passenger door. Miss Hartwell, he said. The flight crew is ready. Evelyn remained still. Vanessa looked relieved for half a second, as though Malcolm had made a mistake. Then Evelyn spoke. My name is Evelyn Hart. Malcolm met her eyes. He understood the correction. Her mother had carried that name through years of rejection. Evelyn would not abandon it now simply because power had arrived. Malcolm inclined his head. Of course. Then he turned toward the reporters. His voice was calm, but every microphone captured it. Chairwoman Hart, the board is waiting. No one laughed. Daniel's face went still. Vanessa removed her sunglasses entirely. A reporter near the curb whispered, Chairwoman? Another raised his voice. Mr. Reed, are you saying Evelyn Hart controls Hartwell Aviation? Malcolm did not answer. He helped Evelyn into the SUV and closed the door. Through the tinted window, she watched Daniel standing beside Vanessa. He looked at the divorce papers in his hand. Then he looked at the vehicle carrying Evelyn away. The envelope with his $200,000 check remained inside his coat. For the first time that morning, it seemed small. Inside the SUV, Malcolm sat across from Evelyn. You should have called me sooner, he said. I know. Your father warned me you would wait until the building was burning before admitting you smelled smoke. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. He also said you exaggerated. He was wrong. The SUV pulled away from the courthouse. Evelyn looked through the rear window. Daniel had stepped into the street, watching them leave. Vanessa stood behind him with her phone pressed to her ear. She knows we found something, Evelyn said. She knows we found more than one thing. Malcolm opened a leather folder and placed 2 documents on the seat between them. Both carried Evelyn's name. Both carried signatures she had never written. The private jet is waiting at Teterboro, Malcolm said. We leave for Dallas as soon as you are medically cleared to fly. Evelyn studied the documents. One transferred voting rights. The other authorized the sale of Hartwell Aviation. The dates were 6 months apart. The signatures matched each other perfectly. That was the first problem. Evelyn never signed her name exactly the same way twice. The second problem was the small break in the letter H, a deliberate flaw, a trap her father had taught her to use when she was 21. Her pulse quickened. Vanessa copied the decoy signature. Malcolm nodded. That was my conclusion. Where did she find it? That is what we need to discover. Evelyn looked back toward the courthouse, though it had disappeared behind traffic and stone buildings. Daniel had used one of those documents in the divorce case. His attorney had submitted it as proof that Evelyn had no connection to Hartwell Aviation. Maybe Daniel had not known it was forged. Maybe he had never asked. Either way, ignorance did not erase damage. Malcolm closed the folder. You don't have to do this today. Yes, I do. You just ended your marriage. My marriage ended before I signed those papers. He studied her face. You still love him. Evelyn looked down at her wedding ring. She had forgotten to remove it. No, she said. Malcolm waited. Evelyn slipped the ring from her finger. Her hand shook once. Then she placed it inside her purse. I love who he promised to become, she said. That man may never have existed. The baby moved beneath her hand. Malcolm looked toward the window and gave her privacy. Evelyn breathed slowly until the movement settled. She was tired, hurt, afraid of what waited in Dallas, but she was no longer alone on courthouse steps while strangers decided who she was. The jet had not arrived to rescue her. It had arrived because the time for hiding was over. And before the day ended, everyone who had laughed at Evelyn Hart would understand one thing. She had not walked out of that courthouse defeated. She had walked out free. By the time Evelyn reached Teterboro Airport, the courthouse felt much farther away than 20 miles. Traffic crawled through Manhattan, then loosened as the SUVs crossed into New Jersey. Malcolm spent most of the ride on the phone. He spoke in clipped sentences about board notices, legal holds, and flight records. Evelyn barely listened. The forged transfer documents rested inside a leather folder on her lap. Her name appeared at the bottom of both pages. The signatures looked perfect. That was the problem. At the private terminal, a nurse checked her blood pressure and listened to the baby's heartbeat. Evelyn had felt pressure since leaving the courthouse, but the nurse found no sign of labor. You need water, food, and a quiet flight, the nurse said. Walk every hour. If the pain changes, tell the crew immediately. Malcolm nodded. Evelyn gave him a tired look. She was speaking to me. I was listening. The nurse smiled. Arguing is fine. Stress is not. Learn the difference. After she. Malcolm handed Evelyn a bottle of water and a bag containing a sandwich, fruit and crackers. You still pack food like I'm 12, Evelyn said. You still forget to eat when you're angry. I ate breakfast. Coffee is not breakfast. It had milk. Your father used that argument. The mention of her father quieted her. Beyond the glass, a white jet waited with the Hartwell wing insignia painted near the tail. Evelyn had not boarded a company aircraft since her father's funeral. The pilot entered the terminal and removed his cap.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Hart.
Evelyn glanced at Malcolm. He lifted one shoulder. The flight crew received the board notice. There was no need to announce it. The pilot looked embarrassed. My apologies, ma'am. You did nothing wrong, Evelyn said. Evelyn is fine. When he walked away, Malcolm said, You cannot ask employees to ignore your title while asking them to defend the authority attached to it. I can ask them to treat me like a person. They can do both. She looked at the aircraft. That title did not protect my mother. No, your father failed her. He failed both of us. And then he tried to repair the damage without knowing how to apologize. Money is a poor apology. That is why he left you voting control instead of a check. Evelyn turned toward him. Come on, Malcolm said. We need to talk before Dallas. Inside the jet, several folders and a tablet had been arranged on the table. Evelyn sat near the window. Malcolm took the seat across from her. Once the plane leveled above the clouds, he opened the first folder. Hartwell Aviation received a purchase offer 8 weeks ago, he said. The buyer is North Star Mobility Group. I've never heard of it. You were not supposed to. He slid a corporate profile toward her. North Star had been formed in Delaware 11 months earlier. Its owners included 2 investment firms and a private family office. Vanessa controls them? Evelyn asked, indirectly. One fund is managed by a former classmate. The second is tied to her mother's family. And the family office? We are still tracing it. Evelyn turned the page. What is North Star buying? 49% of Hartwell Aviation at closing. It also receives an option for another 20% next year. That gives them control. Only if your voting rights are transferred. Malcolm placed the first forged document beside the profile. It stated that Evelyn had surrendered all voting authority in exchange for a fixed annual payment. Another clause removed the board's duty to notify her before any sale. Who drafted this? She asked. Outside counsel hired by Vanessa. My father would never have approved it. Your father is not here to object. The words hurt because they were true. When is the vote? Tomorrow morning. And closing tomorrow afternoon. Evelyn looked up. Then stop the vote. I cannot stop it with a phone call. I control the trust. Only if the board accepts that you never transferred it. She pointed to the page. I did not sign this. You know that. I know that. Vanessa spent months convincing everyone else that you did. She forged my name. Yes. She also planned around your absence. You ignored board notices. You refused certified mail. You told 3 directors you wanted nothing to do with Hartwell. I did want nothing to do with it. That did not remove your responsibility. Evelyn looked away. Malcolm's voice softened. Ownership is more than power. It creates duties. When you leave authority unused, someone else uses it. My mother walked away. Your mother was pushed out. You left by choice. And Vanessa built her plan around that choice. Malcolm nodded. Evelyn touched the signature page. The original authentication record is in my father's safe. Yes, Vanessa has access. She moved the safe to the executive records floor after his funeral. You allowed that? The board approved it. I voted no. But you lost. I did. Evelyn sat back. Malcolm Reed owned companies, airports, and enough stock to move markets. Yet even he could be outvoted. Power always had limits. Can we get a court order, she asked. Possibly, but not before tomorrow without stronger proof. The signature is proof. It is evidence. Proof is what survives challenge. She narrowed her eyes. You sound like my father. He taught me that sentence. He taught me the decoy signature too. Malcolm leaned forward. Explain it. When I was 21, someone copied father's signature onto vendor forms. He created several false versions of our signatures and placed each one in a different internal file. Every version had a small flaw. She touched the break inside the first letter of her last name. This one came from the emergency succession binder. The gap inside the H identified the source. Who could open that binder? My father, his general counsel, the corporate secretary. And after his death, Vanessa became acting chair. She replaced counsel. I don't know who controls the secretary's office now. The corporate secretary resigned 4 months after your father died. Find her. We are trying. Evelyn looked through the window. If Vanessa knows we recognize the signature, she may destroy the record. She may already have. Malcolm slid the second document toward her. This one is worse. The document authorized Hartwell Aviation to guarantee a loan issued to North Star. Evelyn read the amount. $300 million?
Yes. Hartwell is financing the company that plans to buy Hartwell?
That is the structure. If North Star defaults, Hartwell pays the debt.
Yes. And Vanessa keeps North Star's ownership? Yes.
Evelyn placed the page on the table. This is not an investment. She is using the company's own money to take control of it. Her father had taught her to ask a simple question whenever paperwork became complicated. Who carries the loss? In this deal, Vanessa and her investors would keep the profit. Hartwell's employees, creditors, and pension fund would carry the risk. Does the board understand? Evelyn asked. Some directors believe Vanessa has your consent. Others are afraid of losing the deal. Greed and fear. They often sit at the same table. Evelyn reached for the tablet. Show me the trust agreement. She scrolled through pages of legal language until she found Section 14. If ownership of the voting interest was disputed, the beneficiary could activate a temporary freeze. During the freeze, no sale, merger, major loan, or asset transfer could proceed until an independent review ended. This stops tomorrow's vote. It delays it. That is enough. There is a cost. There is always a cost. What is it? Malcolm hesitated. The freeze applies to every trust-controlled asset, and that includes the family medical reserve. Evelyn stared at him. My prenatal account, the reserve funding your care, delivery, and emergency treatment. How long would it be frozen? Until the review ends. Days? Possibly. Weeks? Possibly. She hated that word. What happens to my hospital coverage? They may continue treatment while funding's reviewed. They may also request a personal guarantee. I don't have enough cash for that. I can cover it. No. This is medical care, Evelyn. It still creates a debt. Then we document the debt. Interest. Repayment terms. So, she looked away. Malcolm leaned back. You treat her every offer of help like an attempt to purchase you. People in my family use money to buy silence and loyalty. I am asking for a written loan agreement. The baby shifted beneath her ribs. Evelyn rubbed the spot. Her mother had refused Hartwell money even when rent was late. Evelyn had admired her pride. She also remembered shut-off warnings, cold dinners, and nights when her mother cried behind a locked bathroom door. Pride could protect dignity. It could also make innocent people pay for someone else's fear. I'll sign a loan agreement, Evelyn said. Good. Market interest. Fine. No claim against my shares. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. You think I would convert a medical loan into company ownership? I think you are a businessman. I am offended. You will recover. Evelyn looked back at the freeze provision. If I activate it, Vanessa will know immediately. Yes, she will move records, probably. She may pressure the board to remove me. She already plans to. Evelyn's eyes returned to the forged signature. What about Daniel? Malcolm's expression changed. What about him? He used this in court. Yes, did he know it was forged? We do not know. You think he did? I think ambitious people sometimes avoid questions when honest answers threaten what they want. That is not the same as knowing. No, Malcolm said. It is not. Some part of Evelyn still wanted to believe Daniel had been manipulated. She hated that part, but she could not silence it. Malcolm's phone lit up. Vanessa is meeting Daniel at Mercer Dynamics, he said. How do you know? One of our analysts follows North Star's meetings. That sounds like surveillance. It is legal research. What does she want from him? Malcolm read the message. She is offering him the presidency of North Star's aviation technology division. Daniel had spent years trying to move his company into airport systems. The position would give him access to Hartwell contracts and global operations. It was everything he wanted. Will he accept? Malcolm asked. Evelyn looked at the forged signature. Yes, she said. He will tell himself he earned it. Across the river, Daniel stood inside the conference room at Mercer Dynamics, staring at the contract Vanessa had placed before him. President, he asked. President of Aviation Technology, Vanessa said. You would report to North Star's chief executive. Who is that? It will be announced after closing. Who controls North Star? Private investors. That is not an answer. Vanessa crossed one leg over the other. The ownership is confidential. Daniel pushed the contract away. That morning he would have signed without hesitation. Then Malcolm Reed had arrived at the courthouse and called Evelyn chairwoman. Why didn't you tell me Evelyn had voting rights, he asked. Because she doesn't. Malcolm thinks she does. Malcolm wants to block the sale. Evelyn gives him an excuse. He came in person. He enjoys theater. Daniel looked out the window. Evelyn's accusation followed him. You didn't want an honest answer because an honest answer might have required you to trust me. Did you prepare a custody petition? He asked. Our attorney prepared options. I asked for financial protection. Custody affects finances. It is my child, if it is your child. Daniel stood, his chair rolled backward. Do not say that again. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. You questioned the paternity first. I was angry. You were cautious. I was cruel. The admission left a silence between them. Daniel remembered Evelyn's face when he demanded the test. She had stared at him and said, You will remember this conversation longer than I will. At the time, he had called it a threat. Now he understood. Show me the original transfer document, he said. You saw a copy in Discovery. I want the original. That is unnecessary. My attorney filed it in court. Vanessa picked up the contract. This position will disappear if you let guilt control you. Maybe it should. You built your company from nothing. Evelyn hid an entire dynasty from you. She was still my wife. She made you look foolish. No, Daniel said. I did that myself. Vanessa's face cooled. He picked up his phone. I need time. The board votes tomorrow. Then you should have answered my questions today. He headed toward the door. Vanessa spoke behind him. Evelyn is going to use that jet, that title, and that baby to punish you. Daniel stopped without turning. Maybe, he said. But you are the one offering me a promotion before the divorce papers are dry. Then he left. On the jet, Evelyn reached the authorization page. Malcolm placed a small metal token on the table. The Hartwell wing was engraved on one side. This belonged to your father, he said. It creates the second code. He trusted you with it? He trusted me to use it only if the trust was threatened. I could not activate it alone. The first code had to come from you. Evelyn held the token. Activating the freeze would end any hope of returning quietly to her old life. Vanessa would challenge her. The board would investigate. Reporters would dig into her mother's past. Her child would be born during a corporate war. Evelyn might have prevented if she had returned sooner. You can wait until we land, Malcolm said. The vote is tomorrow. Yes. If Vanessa moves alone tonight, the freeze may come too late. Yes. Evelyn entered her code. The screen requested confirmation. Once I do this, the dispute becomes public. Yes. The medical reserve stops immediately? Yes. Have counsel prepare the loan agreement. It is already drafted. Of course it is. You have known me most of your life. That has never made you less irritating. It has made me prepared. Evelyn pressed the metal token against the tablet. A 6-digit code appeared. She entered it into the final field. A warning filled the screen. Activation will freeze all trust-controlled transactions pending independent review. She pressed confirm. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the message changed. Freeze active. Malcolm's phone began ringing. The pilot's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Reed, Hartwell Operations says the company card linked to this aircraft has been suspended. Malcolm looked at Evelyn. The freeze works quickly. Use Reed Capital's account. Already done. Her own phone vibrated. Board members, attorneys, reporters. Daniel's name appeared. She did not answer. A notification from her hospital portal arrived next. Payment authorization under review. Contact patient financial services before your next appointment. Evelyn read it twice. The cost was real now. Malcolm saw her face. We will handle it. We will document it, then handle it. He nodded. Her phone rang again. Vanessa, Evelyn answered. What did you do? Vanessa demanded. Evelyn looked at the forged signature on the table. I stopped you from selling what you never owned. You have no authority. The trust accepted my codes. You froze company accounts. I froze trust-controlled transactions. If you mixed operating money with acquisition financing, that is your problem. You put thousands of jobs at risk. No. You attach their jobs to a buyer you secretly control. That is a lie. Then show the board the original transfer record. Vanessa said nothing. Open father's safe before we arrive, Evelyn continued. You are not entering the executive records floor. Then the independent reviewer will. You think Malcolm can protect you? This is not about protection. It always is with you. You disappear until a powerful man opens a door. Evelyn glanced at Malcolm. He said nothing. I opened this door, Evelyn said. Malcolm only kept the key safe. Vanessa's breathing sharpened. The board will remove you. Then tell them to vote while I am in the room. You will regret this. I already regret waiting. Evelyn ended the call. The jet began its descent toward Dallas. Roads and buildings spread across the flat Texas landscape below. Malcolm closed the folders. You could still leave the board fight to counsel. That is what Vanessa expects. What do you plan to do? Walk into the meeting, and after that, Evelyn placed the forged transfer inside her bag. Make her explain every page. The landing gear lowered. Daniel's name appeared again on her phone. Evelyn turned it face down. Tomorrow, the board would decide whether she was an owner, a liar, or an obstacle to be removed. Tonight, she intended to remind them that silence had never meant surrender. The Hartwell Aviation headquarters rose above downtown Dallas in a tower of blue glass and pale stone. Evelyn entered the boardroom just after 7 that evening. Malcolm walked beside her. 2 attorneys followed with sealed folders and a tablet containing the trust records. 12 directors sat around a walnut table. Legal counsel occupied the seats along the wall. Vanessa stood near the windows with one hand resting on the chair that had once belonged to their father. You're late, Vanessa said. The meeting notice said 7:30. Started early. Then it started without proper notice. A gray-haired director cleared his throat. We were discussing the operational damage caused by the freeze, without the beneficiary who activated it. Vanessa folded her arms. You vanish for years, then arrive and lecture people who kept the company alive. Evelyn sat. Her back ached from the flight, but she kept both hands flat on the table. Who approved the North Star guarantee? No one answered. She repeated the question. A younger director shifted in his seat. The finance committee reviewed it. Who voted? Vanessa answered. Committee did. I asked for names. Your behavior is becoming confrontational. A $300 million guarantee was attached to a company preparing to purchase Hartwell Aviation. Asking who approved it is basic oversight. One attorney nodded before catching himself. Vanessa saw it. You froze major transactions while pregnant, exhausted, and visibly distressed, she said. The board has a duty to consider whether you are making rational decisions. The room changed. Pens stopped moving. Several directors looked down. Vanessa was turning Evelyn's pregnancy into evidence against her. My doctor cleared me to travel, Evelyn said. This is about judgment. You signed away your rights years ago, then claimed forgery after the sale was announced. I did not sign the transfer. You refused to participate in the company. You rejected dividends. You ignored letters. You told directors you wanted nothing from Hartwell. All true. Vanessa smiled. Evelyn continued.
None of those choices authorized you to forge my name.
The smile disappeared. A director near the far end spoke. Do you have proof? I have a signature copied from a controlled internal file. That proves access, Vanessa said. It does not prove forgery. It proves the signature did not come from me. I am asking the board to preserve records while an independent examiner tests the documents. The sale may collapse. Then the buyer should survive a delay. Thousands of employees depend on this deal, the older director said. Employees depend on a stable company, Evelyn replied. They do not depend on one rush buyer. If a transaction cannot survive questions about ownership and debt, it should not close. Her father had taught her that urgency could be real, but it could also be manufactured. People created deadlines when they wanted fear to replace careful thought. Vanessa leaned closer. You have never managed an airline. No. You have never negotiated aircraft leases, labor contracts, or fuel agreements. No. Then stop pretending you understand this company. I am not telling pilots how to fly. I am asking why the acting chair used company assets to support a buyer tied to her own network. Several directors exchanged glances. North Star is independent, Vanessa said. Then disclose every owner. That information is confidential. Not from a board being asked to guarantee its debt. Malcolm slid a folder across the table. Our preliminary research shows 2 North Star investors have personal or professional ties to Vanessa Hartwell. Vanessa did not touch it. This meeting concerns Evelyn's freeze, not Malcolm's private investigation. It is not private anymore, Malcolm replied. Evelyn looked toward the general counsel. Preserve every email, access log, board packet, and payment record connected to North Star. The general counsel hesitated. That direction must come from the chair. I am the trust beneficiary whose voting rights are disputed, Vanessa laughed. You believe the company belongs to you because your father felt guilty. Evelyn's fingers pressed against the tabletop. He left you a title you never earned, Vanessa continued. You hid in Brooklyn while the rest of us worked. Now you walk in with Malcolm Reed and expect everyone to kneel. My father's guilt does not decide whether a signature is real. You are creating a crisis because your marriage failed. That has nothing to do with the transfer. It has everything to do with your state of mind. You refused medical advice at the courthouse. You froze funds meant for your pregnancy. These are not stable choices. Evelyn looked at her. Where did you get my medical information? Vanessa paused.
I was told you experience pain. By whom?
Daniel was concerned. Before Evelyn could respond, the boardroom door opened. Daniel entered with a folder under his arm. Every head turned. Vanessa's confidence flickered. What are you doing here? I was invited to discuss the North Star Technology Division. That meeting was tomorrow. I moved it. He looked at Evelyn. You should be resting, he said. You flew to Dallas to tell me that? No. Then why are you here? Daniel placed the folder on the table. This afternoon, I asked my finance team to review every outside investment Mercer Dynamics received during the last 3 years. Vanessa stepped toward him. Daniel, this is not the place. It is exactly the place. He removed several statements. 18 months ago, my company received $12 million from Brighton Strategic Partners. I was told Brighton was independent. It is not. A director looked toward Vanessa. Brighton is managed by Andrew Cole, Daniel continued. He was Vanessa's business school classmate. His fund received capital from a Hartwell-controlled account 6 weeks before investing in my company. Vanessa's voice hardened. You do not understand the structure. I understand that my chief financial officer signed a side letter promising not to identify the original provider. He placed the letter on the table. That instruction came from your office. The directors began speaking at once. Vanessa raised her voice. The investment was legal. Then why hide the source? It was confidential. Daniel turned toward Evelyn. You were right. I accepted information because it gave me what I wanted. Her face did not soften. You came after learning your promotion might be built on her money. No. Then why now? Because if Vanessa financed my company without my knowledge, she may have used me during the divorce. May have? He flinched. Evelyn stood slowly. Malcolm reached toward her, but she shook her head. Daniel stepped forward. Evelyn, please, do not. I am trying to help. You had 3 years. I did not know. You did not ask. I asked you constantly. You demanded proof that I deserved your trust. That is not what happened. It is exactly what happened. Vanessa watched in silence. Daniel lowered his voice. The transfer document may be false, and your career may collapse with Vanessa. That is why you are here. That is unfair. You keep saying that whenever the truth reaches you. His face tightened. I left the North Star contract unsigned. That does not repair what you did. I know. Do you? Daniel looked around the room, then back at her. I questioned whether our child was mine. I let attorneys search your life. I used documents I did not understand because they supported the case I wanted to make. I cannot undo that. No one moved. But I can provide every email and financial record related to Brighton and North Star, he continued. If Vanessa's people were inside my company, independent counsel should see it. Vanessa crossed her arms. You signed confidentiality agreements. Then sue me. The words cut through the room. For the first time, Daniel was risking something without knowing whether Evelyn would forgive him. It mattered. It did not erase anything. Send the records to independent counsel, she said. Hope appeared in his eyes. Then she added, do not send them to me. Why? Because I do not trust you. The hope vanished. Daniel nodded once. I understand. No, you are beginning to. The board approved a preservation order by 7 votes to 5. Vanessa voted against it. The sale remained frozen. Emails, access logs, and payment records could not legally be deleted. Evelyn had one time, only time. After the meeting, Malcolm insisted she eat. They moved to a small conference room on the 23rd floor. Evelyn sat near the window with a bowl of soup she barely touched. Daniel waited outside the glass door. He has been standing there for 10 minutes, Malcolm said. He is free to leave. Accuracy and cruelty can share a sentence, Evelyn. She looked at him. Your father taught me that, Malcolm added. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Is this Evelyn Hart? A man asked. Yes. My name is Charles Bennett. I was senior internal auditor at Hartwell Aviation. Malcolm straightened. Evelyn put the call on speaker. I remember you. You worked for my father for 19 years. What happened? I was terminated 4 months ago. By Vanessa? By the audit committee, officially. What did you find? A pause followed. Payments routed through Delaware. Consulting fees, software licenses, and intercompany loans. The money moved through 3 entities before reaching North Star. Do you have records? Part of the ledger and 2 approval emails. Send them to independent counsel. I cannot email them. They track outgoing files. I need to meet you. Where? The Crescent Hotel. Lobby bar. 1 hour. We will be there. The call ended. Daniel opened the glass door. Evelyn looked up. Were you listening? No. Security told me someone contacted you. You need to leave. I know Charles Bennett. Malcolm turned. How? He called my office last month asking about Brighton. My assistant thought it was a sales inquiry. Did you return the call? Evelyn asked. No, her mouth tightened. I should have, Daniel said. Yes, I can help identify the transactions. Send your records to counsel. Evelyn, if Bennett is meeting you, Vanessa may know. She does not control every person in Dallas. She knew about your pain at the courthouse. You told her. No. She said you were concerned. I never discussed your health with her. Then how did she know? Daniel thought for a moment. The reporter nearest us asked whether you were in pain before anyone else noticed. Vanessa may have placed him there to watch you. Malcolm picked up his phone. Security will review the footage. Daniel looked at Evelyn. Do not go alone. I am not alone. I mean with someone who understands Vanessa's network. You do not get to become useful now and call it loyalty. I am not asking you to call it anything. Then respect my answer. He stared at her, then stepped back. Fine. But if Bennett mentions Brighton, contact independent counsel immediately. Evelyn picked up her coat. You should have cared this much before you saw the jet. His face fell. She walked past him. At the Crescent Hotel, Evelyn and Malcolm waited in a quiet corner of the lobby bar. 9 o'clock passed, then 9:15. Charles Bennett did not appear.
At 9:23, Evelyn's phone rang.
I'm sorry, Charles whispered. Where are you? I cannot meet. Did someone threaten you? My attorney received a letter. Hartwell is enforcing my confidentiality agreement. They also claim I stole company property. Did you? I copied records because I believed they were being destroyed. Then give them to independent counsel. If I do, they will freeze my retirement accounts and sue my daughter. She works for a Hartwell contractor. Evelyn looked at Malcolm. His face was grim. Charles, a confidentiality agreement cannot lawfully force you to hide fraud. That may be true in the end. I still have to survive long enough to reach the end. His voice dropped lower. I sent one page before they found me. Where? To the secure address in Malcolm Reed's last letter. Malcolm checked his phone. A file had arrived. Look at the Delaware authorization number, Charles said. It connects North Star to the executive office. Whose authorization? I cannot say, Charles. I'm sorry. The call ended. Malcolm opened the file. It showed a transfer from a Hartwell reserve account into a Delaware company connected to North Star. At the bottom was an approval code. The name beside it had been blacked out. They had part of the truth. Vanessa had already frightened the witness into silence, and someone inside Hartwell had known exactly where he planned to meet them. At 8 the next morning, Evelyn stood inside her father's old office and studied the blacked-out authorization code from Charles Bennett's file. The office had been preserved for appearances, but the room no longer belonged to the man she remembered. His books had been rearranged. His framed aviation maps had been replaced by awards bearing Vanessa's name. Even the old brass model of Hartwell's first passenger plane was gone. Malcolm placed a second document beside the Delaware transfer. Security traced the leak at the Crescent, he said. Someone in Daniel's company accessed his calendar after he entered the hotel address. Vanessa still has someone inside Mercer Dynamics. Daniel believes it is his chief financial officer. Believes? He is questioning him now. Evelyn looked at the blocked approval name. Charles said the code came from the executive office. Yes, Vanessa will claim an assistant approved it, probably. Then we make her explain the ownership chain herself. Malcolm watched her. In front of the board? In front of everyone she has spent a year convincing. She may refuse. Then the directors will have to decide why their acting chair cannot explain a $300 million transaction. Malcolm gave a slow nod. Evelyn reached for the emergency meeting notice. The trust agreement allows the disputed beneficiary to request a review of any transaction blocked by the freeze. It allows a review. It does not guarantee a vote. I don't need the vote to pass. What do you need? I need Vanessa to put her version on the record. Malcolm's expression sharpened. Once Vanessa explained the transaction under formal questioning, she would be trapped by her own words. She could not change the ownership story later without exposing the lie. Your father used that strategy, Malcolm said. He taught me that people protect false stories by keeping them vague, and once they give details, they create facts that can be tested. Malcolm picked up the meeting notice. I'll have counsel deliver it. No, send it from my office. You do not have an office. Evelyn looked around the room. I do now. The emergency board meeting began at 10:30. Vanessa entered last, followed by the general counsel and 2 outside attorneys. She wore a white suit and carried a stack of binders. Daniel arrived a minute later. He had not shaved. His shirt collar was open, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. He placed a flash drive on the table in front of the independent attorney. Vanessa stared at it. What is that? Every email, payment record, and internal message connected to Brighton Strategic Partners. Daniel said, you have no right to disclose company files. It is my company. You signed a confidentiality agreement. I resigned from the North Star position I never accepted. You cannot resign from a job you did not have. Then you have nothing to complain about. A director near the end of the table hid a smile. Vanessa looked at Daniel with eyes that had become almost impossibly cold, like the glass outside the boardroom before sunrise. You are making an emotional decision because your former wife embarrassed you.
Daniel pulled out a chair. My former wife did not create those payments. You have no idea what she created.
Evelyn entered with Malcolm and sat across from Vanessa. Then show us, Evelyn said. The board chair called the meeting to order. He explained that the sole purpose was to review the ownership structure behind North Star Mobility Group and determine whether the frozen transaction could proceed. Vanessa opened her first binder. North Star is owned by 3 independent investors, she said. Each investor passed legal review. Evelyn leaned forward. Name them. The names are in the board packet. Read them aloud. Vanessa glanced toward her attorney. He whispered something. Vanessa turned back to the table. Brighton Strategic Partners, Cole Meridian Fund, Alder Family Office. Who controls Brighton?
Andrew Cole, your former classmate? Yes. Who provided Brighton with the capital used to invest in Mercer Dynamics?
That question is unrelated. It is directly related. Daniel's records show Hartwell money entered Brighton before Brighton invested in his company. Vanessa closed the binder. The investment supported a technology partner. Why hide the source? Commercial privacy. Daniel spoke from the other side of the table. My chief financial officer was instructed to conceal the original provider. Vanessa did not look at him. Evelyn continued. Who gave that instruction? I do not manage Mr. Mercer's employees. The instruction came from your executive office. According to a document supplied by a terminated auditor who stole company records. Did your office issue the instruction? Vanessa's attorney leaned forward. My client is not required to answer accusations based on illegally obtained material. The board chair looked uncomfortable. Vanessa, a direct answer would help. Vanessa lifted her chin. My office approved confidentiality protections connected to a legitimate investment. Evelyn nodded once. It was the first detail on the record. Who controls Cole Meridian Fund? She asked. A group of private investors. Your mother's brother sits on its advisory board. He has no voting control. Does your mother hold an interest? That is private. Did Hartwell Aviation guarantee any loan connected to Cole Meridian? No. Malcolm slid a document toward the board chair. According to the preliminary bank response, Hartwell assets were listed as secondary security for a credit line used by Cole Meridian. The directors began speaking at once. Vanessa turned toward Malcolm. You contacted the bank without board approval? The bank contacted Hartwell after the freeze. You had no authority to request confidential information. The trust agreement gave independent counsel authority to identify blocked obligations. Vanessa looked toward the general counsel. He lowered his eyes. Evelyn saw the moment Vanessa understood that some of the people around her were no longer certain she could protect them. What about Alder Family Office? Evelyn asked. Vanessa's hand tightened around her pen. It is an independent family investment firm. Which family? That information is protected. By whom? By law. Name the law. Vanessa did not answer. Evelyn looked around the table. A board is being asked to sell control of Hartwell Aviation to a buyer whose owners remain partly hidden. The same board is also being asked to guarantee that buyer's debt. Does anyone here believe that would be accepted in another company? No one spoke. She turned back to Vanessa. Who controls Alder? Vanessa closed the second binder. I will not expose private clients because you walked into this room and demanded it. Then I move that the board suspend consideration of the North Star sale until the beneficial owners are verified. A director raised his hand. Seconded. Vanessa stood. You cannot make that motion. Her voting status is disputed. The board chair looked toward independent counsel. The attorney adjusted his glasses. She may request the motion under the trust review clause. Whether she can vote is a separate question. Vanessa looked around the table. You are allowing a woman with no management experience to destroy a transaction that has taken months to build. Evelyn remained seated. You had months to disclose the owners. You abandoned this company. I left operations. I did not authorize theft. You keep using that word without proof. Evelyn opened the folder containing the transfer document. Then let us discuss the proof you rely on. Vanessa's expression changed. Only slightly. It was enough. The outside attorney beside her opened a binder and removed the original transfer agreement. This document was signed by Evelyn Hart 2 years ago, he said. It transferred all voting authority to the acting chair in exchange for an annual payment she later declined. Where was it signed? Evelyn asked. The execution page states New York. What location? A Hartwell conference facility. Which one? The attorney checked the page. Hudson Executive Center. Evelyn looked toward Malcolm. He gave no reaction. What date? She asked. September 14th. And who witnessed it? Corporate Secretary Linda Carver. Where is Miss Carver? She resigned. Has anyone spoken to her? Vanessa answered. Her location is unknown. Daniel pushed a paper toward independent counsel. I found an email from Vanessa's office instructing my attorney to use this transfer during the divorce. Vanessa turned on him. You asked for proof Evelyn had no financial claim against you. I asked for accurate information. You were happy to use it. Daniel held her gaze. Yes, I was. The room quieted. I wanted the document to be true, he continued. It made Evelyn look dishonest and made me look like the injured husband. I did not ask where the original came from. That was my failure. Evelyn looked at him. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not search her face for approval. He simply placed another email on the table. This message offered me the North Star position 2 days before the final divorce hearing. I did not know that at the time. My chief financial officer hid it in a private folder. Vanessa's voice sharpened. You cannot prove I ordered that.
No, Daniel said. But I can prove your office expected the divorce to end before you announced the job. You are throwing away your company for a woman who lied to you.
Daniel's answer came without hesitation. My company is already compromised if it was built with money I was never allowed to identify. Vanessa laughed once. Do you think Evelyn will take you back because you gave up a title? Daniel looked toward Evelyn, then back at Vanessa. This is not a performance for her. For the first time, Evelyn believed him. It did not rebuild trust. It did not erase the courthouse or the paternity accusation. It showed that he was finally choosing the truth without demanding a reward. The board chair called for order. Miss Hart, he said, you claim the transfer signature is forged. Please explain your basis. Evelyn lifted the document. First, I was not in New York on September 14th. Vanessa sat down slowly. Travel records can be changed, she said. Private airport records are harder to change. Malcolm passed flight logs to the independent attorney. Hartwell Aviation transported Evelyn from Boston to Seattle that morning, he said. The aircraft remained in the air during the stated signing time. Vanessa's attorney looked at the log. She could have signed electronically. The document states wet signature witnessed in person, Evelyn said. Then the date may be a clerical mistake. That would require the witness to explain it. Vanessa leaned back. Linda Carver handled hundreds of documents. Evelyn placed her father's gold ring on the table. Second, the signature contains an authentication mark. Several directors leaned closer. Vanessa did not move. Evelyn pointed to the small break inside the letter H. My father had a problem with forged vendor approvals years ago. He created controlled versions of our signatures and stored them in separate internal files. Each version had a different flaw. The board chair studied the page. What did this version identify? The emergency succession binder. Vanessa's attorney spoke quickly. Can you prove that? Evelyn turned the ring over. Inside the band was a line of tiny numbers. My father recorded the signature codes here. He kept one half. Malcolm Reed kept the matching key. Malcolm placed the metal token from the jet beside the ring. Independent counsel entered both codes into the archived trust system. The screen displayed a file reference. Emergency succession binder. Decoy signature H4. A murmur moved around the table. Vanessa's face remained controlled, but the color had left it. Evelyn slid the transfer agreement across the table. The signature on this document was copied from a file created to catch forgery. Vanessa stood again. This proves only that Evelyn used the decoy signature herself. Evelyn looked at her. That was the defense she had expected. Then the document should contain my pressure pattern. Your what? My father required every controlled signature to include a physical mark made by the signatory. Evelyn held the ring between two fingers. The wing on this ring leaves a shallow impression beside the final letter when I sign a protected document. Independent counsel lifted the original transfer page beneath a light. There was no impression. He turned it over. The paper was smooth. Evelyn pointed to the blank space beside the signature. The signature is correct. The authentication mark is missing. Whoever copied it knew what my name looked like, but did not know how I proved it was mine. The room fell silent. Vanessa's attorney whispered into her ear. She pushed him away. Daniel stared at the document, then lowered his head. He understood what it meant. The evidence used in his divorce case had been forged. The board chair looked toward Vanessa. Where did this document come from? Vanessa reached into her third binder. You want to discuss fraud? She said. Then we should discuss whether Evelyn Hart is mentally and physically capable of protecting a child. Evelyn's body went still. Vanessa removed a medical report and placed it before the board. The document carried Evelyn's doctor's name. It claimed she had refused treatment, suffered repeated emotional episodes, and placed her pregnancy at risk through unstable decisions. Daniel stood so quickly his chair struck the wall. That is false. Vanessa looked at him. You are no longer part of this family matter. Evelyn picked up the medical report. The letterhead looked real. The signature did too. At the bottom, a prepared custody petition named Daniel as the proposed primary parent after the birth. Vanessa leaned across the table. You may have trapped a copied signature, she said, but before you celebrate, perhaps you should explain why your own doctor believes you are a danger to your unborn child. Daniel reached for the medical report, but Vanessa pulled it away. You do not get to touch it, she said. Evelyn remained standing at the boardroom table. Her father's ring rested beside the forged transfer agreement. Across from it sat the new weapon Vanessa had chosen. A medical report, a custody petition, a threat aimed at her child. Who gave you this? Evelyn asked. Vanessa slid the report toward the independent attorney. It was delivered through proper legal channels. That was not my question. My source is protected. Evelyn looked at the first page again. The name of her obstetrician appeared beneath the Hartwell Medical Center logo. Dr. Rachel Collins. Evelyn knew Rachel's signature. She had seen it on appointment summaries, test results, and travel clearance forms. The signature on Vanessa's report looked convincing. Too convincing. Daniel stepped beside Evelyn. "I never requested that petition," he said. Vanessa looked at him. "Your attorney prepared it to protect your parental rights. My former attorney. You did not object when paternity was questioned. I was wrong. That does not make the concern disappear." Daniel took a breath. "You are using my worst decision to threaten her. I am giving you an opportunity to protect your child. From the mother who has protected that child every day?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "You were singing a different song yesterday. I learned new facts. You learned Evelyn had money." Daniel flinched, but he did not step back. Evelyn lifted the medical report. "Dr. Collins cleared me to fly yesterday," she said. "She did not describe me as unstable." Vanessa sat down. "Perhaps she changed her opinion after you froze your own medical funds. The freeze affected the trust. It did not cancel my care. You placed pride above your child. I accepted a documented loan to protect my treatment." A few directors looked toward Malcolm. He nodded. The agreement was signed before the flight landed. Vanessa's mouth tightened. Evelyn turned to the independent attorney. "Call Dr. Collins. We can request confirmation," he said. "Call her now." Vanessa's attorney objected. "A board meeting is not a courtroom." "No," Evelyn replied. "In a courtroom, presenting a false medical document would create even greater problems." Vanessa stood. "You have accused me of fraud twice in 1 hour. I proved the first forgery. You proved an old signature system existed. You have not proved who copied it. That is why we are preserving records." The board chair raised one hand. "This meeting cannot continue responsibly while both the transfer and the medical report remain disputed." Vanessa turned toward him. "Then remove Evelyn from the vote. Both of you will be temporarily suspended from board authority," he said. The room became silent. Evelyn stared at him. "Both? Until independent counsel completes an initial review. You are rewarding the person who created the dispute. I am protecting the company." Vanessa gave Evelyn a small smile. It was the first victory she had enjoyed all morning. Evelyn understood what she had done. Vanessa had introduced a second accusation large enough to frighten the board. Even if the report was false, the allegation involved a child. Directors would choose delay over risk. The vote to suspend them passed 8-4. Evelyn lost access to the executive records floor. Vanessa lost her acting authority, but her allies still controlled several committees. The North Star sale remained frozen. Everything else stopped, outside the boardroom. Malcolm walked beside Evelyn toward the elevators. "This is temporary," he said. "Temporary decisions can become permanent if the wrong people control the review. Independent counsel has the records. They have records Vanessa allowed them to find." Daniel followed them into the hall. "Evelyn." She kept walking. "I can prove I never authorized the custody petition," he said. "That does not prove Vanessa created the report. I know who may have helped her." Evelyn stopped. Daniel removed his phone. "My chief financial officer, Thomas Reed, admitted that Vanessa's office paid a consulting firm to monitor the divorce case." Malcolm looked at the screen. "Do you have that admission in writing?" "No. He said it during a meeting, then he can deny it. He already has." Evelyn pressed the elevator button, Daniel continued. "But he kept the payment instructions. They passed through Brighton. Send them to counsel." "I did." The elevator doors opened. Before Evelyn entered, "There is more," she turned. "I gave counsel full access to Mercer Dynamics." Malcolm studied him. "Full access? Emails, payment ledgers, private folders, executive messages, everything. Your board approved that?" Evelyn asked. "No. What happens when they find out? They will remove me." Vanessa's voice came from behind them. "Finally, something we agree on." She approached with her attorneys. "You open company records without a board vote?"
Vanessa asked Daniel.
"Yes. Then Mercer Dynamics will sue you. Probably. Your investors will walk. Some already have." Vanessa smiled. "And what do you think this sacrifice buys you?" Daniel looked at Evelyn. "Nothing," Vanessa laughed. "You are giving away your company for nothing?" "I built it while accepting money I did not understand. If the foundation is dishonest, keeping the title means very little." Evelyn watched him. Months earlier, Daniel had treated every loss as humiliation. He had defended his reputation even when defending it hurt her. Now his company was slipping from his hands and he was choosing disclosure anyway. Vanessa shook her head. "She will never forgive you." Daniel's voice stayed calm. "That is her decision." The elevator doors began to close. Evelyn stepped inside with Malcolm. Daniel remained in the hallway. He did not try to follow her. That evening, independent counsel arranged a private hearing inside Hartwell's Manhattan headquarters. The meeting took place 2 days later, after the company's legal team collected the Mercer Dynamics files. Evelyn entered the conference room with Malcolm and her own attorney. Vanessa sat across from them. The board had required both women to attend without media, assistants, or family representatives. Daniel waited in another room to give testimony. Charles Bennett's chair remained empty. The former auditor had refused to appear. His attorney claimed the risk to his daughter's career was too high. Without him, the Delaware ledger had less force. Vanessa knew it. You brought us here without your witness, she said. Independent counsel opened the meeting. We have testimony, company records, and the original medical report. Vanessa leaned back. Then let us finish. The attorney placed the report on the table. Dr. Rachel Collins confirmed she did not prepare or sign this document. Vanessa did not react. She also confirmed that no member of her staff released Mrs. Hart's medical file. Then someone had received information from another doctor. The report uses her letterhead. I did not create it. Evelyn looked at Vanessa. Who gave it to you? I already answered. No. You hid behind a source. Vanessa turned toward independent counsel. Am I required to disclose private communications? You are required to explain how a false medical report reached a board meeting under your control. Vanessa's attorney whispered to her. She ignored him. The report was sent to my office, she said. By whom? A legal consultant. Name the consultant. This has become harassment. Evelyn pushed a payment record across the table. Mercer Dynamics paid Halpern Risk Advisory $30,000. Brighton reimbursed the payment. Your office approved the reimbursement. Vanessa looked at the page. Evelyn continued. Halpern's managing partner is married to a records supervisor at Hartwell Medical Center. Vanessa's attorney reached for the document. Evelyn kept her hand on it. Did Halpern send you the report? Vanessa's gaze hardened. Answer, her independent counsel said. Vanessa looked around the room. For once, no director was present to interrupt. No reporter waited outside to shape public opinion. No ally could change the subject. Yes, she said. Halpern sent it. Did you verify it? Evelyn asked. I was told it came from a reliable source. Did you call Dr. Collins? No. Did you ask for the original file? No. You brought it to the board anyway. I believed the child was at risk. You believed it would keep me suspended. Vanessa struck the table with her palm. You do not get to lecture me about responsibility. Her voice rose for the first time. You disappeared. Father spent years waiting for you to return. Every holiday became another conversation about Evelyn. Every board decision came with the same question. What would Evelyn think? What would Evelyn want? Evelyn sat still. Vanessa continued. I worked in that company from the ground floor. I sat through labor negotiations. I traveled during holidays. I defended Hartwell while you lived in Brooklyn and pretended our name meant nothing. I never said your work meant nothing. You never had to. Father gave you control. He gave me voting rights because he did not trust the structure around him. He gave them to you because he felt guilty about your mother. That guilt was earned. Vanessa's face twisted. You always looked at us as if we were contaminated. I stayed away because every visit became a battle over my mother. You wanted him to choose you over everyone else. I wanted him to admit what he did to her, and when he tried to repair it, you punished him by refusing everything. Evelyn's voice softened. Yes. Vanessa blinked. Evelyn continued. I punished him. I also left you alone with a company you were desperate to control. You think this is your fault? No. Your choices are yours. Evelyn pointed to the report. You had years of work you could have been proud of. You traded it for forged documents, hidden loans, and a false custody case. Vanessa's eyes filled, but her voice stayed sharp. You would have taken Hartwell from me the moment you returned. I would have required accountability. That means the same thing when you hold the votes. Independent counsel placed another file on the table. The Mercer records show that Ms. Hartwell's office approved the hidden investment in Daniel Mercer's company. They also show that the North Star position was offered to influence his cooperation during the divorce. Vanessa turned toward the door. You used him, Evelyn said. He used you first. That did not give you ownership of his mistakes. I gave him what he wanted, and that was your strategic error. Vanessa looked back. You believed everyone could be controlled by giving them something, Evelyn continued. Daniel wanted status. The directors wanted a fast sale. Halpern wanted money. Charles Bennett wanted safety. You never considered what would happen when one of them chose the truth instead. The door opened. Daniel entered with his attorney. Vanessa stared at him. He placed a signed statement before independent counsel. I am waiving confidentiality and accepting personal responsibility for every false document my attorney submitted, he said. I will testify in court if required. Vanessa laughed bitterly.
You think honesty now makes you brave?
No, Daniel replied. It makes me late. His answer ended her resistance, not because she accepted defeat, because the records around her had removed every safe escape. Independent counsel announced the immediate findings. Vanessa would remain suspended. The board would begin proceedings to remove her permanently. The North Star sale was canceled. The guarantee was voided. Funds transferred through Brighton and Cole Meridian would be traced and recovered. The false medical report and forged transfer agreement would be referred to the proper authorities. Vanessa stood. What happens to Evelyn? The review found no basis to challenge her voting rights, counsel said. Vanessa looked at her sister. You won. Evelyn shook her head. This was never supposed to be a war. It became one when father chose you. No. It became one when you decided his choice gave you permission to lie. Vanessa picked up her purse. At the door, she stopped. I did love that company. Evelyn believed her. That is why you should have protected it, she said. 6 weeks later, Evelyn stood inside a small Brooklyn Heights kitchen, washing 2 coffee cups while rain tapped against the windows. Her medical fund had been restored. Hartwell's board had confirmed her voting control. She had appointed an interim chair and refused the position for herself until after the baby arrived. Daniel sat at the table. He looked different without the expensive suit and executive confidence. Mercer Dynamics had removed him as chief executive. He retained a small ownership interest, but the company's future remained uncertain. He placed a folder beside the sugar bowl. "What is that?" Evelyn asked. "Documents surrendering any financial claim connected to Hartwell." "You never had one. My divorce attorney suggested I could argue that your voting rights should have been disclosed as a marital asset." Her hand stopped above the sink. "Are you planning to argue that?" "No." "Then why prepare the documents?" "Because I want the answer to exist somewhere other than inside my head." She dried her hands and opened the folder. Daniel had also surrendered any request for control over the baby's trust, medical decisions, or residence. Evelyn looked up. "You are still the father. You have rights. I know. I am giving up leverage, not responsibility." "Your attorney approved this?" He called it unnecessarily severe. "And I told him necessity is not the point." Evelyn closed the folder. "What is the point?" Daniel met her eyes. "I spent our marriage treating trust like a contract you had to earn. I want to remove the things I could use against you. You cannot fix us with paperwork. I know. You cannot stand in court and confess once, then expect everything to disappear." "I know that too." She studied him. "A chance to attend the next doctor's appointment. You missed the last one. I was meeting investigators. You could have called. You told me to communicate through your attorney." "I did. So I followed your boundary." That answer caught her off guard. Daniel looked toward the window. "I am trying to learn the difference between persistence and disrespect," he said. Evelyn sat across from him. "The appointment is Thursday at 10. His eyes returned to her. "Can I come?" "Yes, thank you." "This does not mean we are together. I understand. It does not mean I forgive you. I understand that too. You say that often now. I was slow to understand many things." A small smile reached her face before she could stop it. Daniel noticed, but he did not celebrate. He poured coffee into both cups. 3 weeks later, Evelyn gave birth to a healthy daughter. They named her Grace Hart Mercer. Daniel stayed beside Evelyn through 16 hours of labor. He followed the nurse's instructions. He held Evelyn's hand when she offered it and released it when she asked. After Grace fell asleep in the hospital bassinet, Daniel stood near the window. Evelyn watched him. "You can hold her," she said. He turned. She finally settled. "She will wake again." He lifted Grace carefully and sat beside the bed. For several minutes, neither adult spoke. Then Daniel looked at Evelyn. "I used to think providing meant controlling every outcome. And now I think it means showing up, even when no one applauds." Evelyn looked at their daughter. "That is a better place to start." "Start?" She met his eyes. "Do not make me regret the word." "I won't. You might. Then I will face it when I do." Evelyn reached across the space between them and touched Grace's tiny hand. Daniel covered Evelyn's fingers with his own, then waited. She did not pull away. Outside the hospital window, Manhattan lights stretched across the night. No cameras waited below. No private jet crossed the sky. No one announced Evelyn's title. For once, power had nothing to do with wealth. It was the right to choose what came next. And this time, Evelyn chose with her eyes open.